Live well, win well. It's on point with Juandolyn Stokes, right here on News and Talk, WAOK. And I'm so glad to have sharing with us today Dante King, who is certainly the brains, the thoughts, the creative behind this new podcast and even writing a book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. Pleasant good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Juandolyn. It is great to be with you. I'm doing wonderful.
Wonderful. I'm glad to have you sharing with us. I'm going to pull something that you've already used with Toni Morrison that white people have a problem. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a serious problem. She says that it's a profound neurosis. It should be looked upon or studied as a profound neurosis. And she says that no one has really examined it for what it is. And in my book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, I trace the legal history where white people are through the colonial period into the formation of the United States using all levers of institutionality. And what I mean by that are the law, so the legal lever, the political lever, the institutional academic and scientific levers throughout this culture to continue to perpetuate this idea that they somehow are superior to Black people. And so there's a paper that I quote in my book by law professor Cheryl I. Harris, and it's titled Whiteness as Property, where she is saying that white people's only value depends on having others to subjugate. And when we trace particularly the legal history of this country, for example, the 1790 Naturalization Act, which was
Yeah.
the first law around citizenship, that law established that you had to be white. And so whiteness is a juxtaposition against blackness. And they put us, these are political functions. These are political classifications as well as legal and cultural classifications. And that is much of the foundational bases of my work and for my book.
Yeah, and if it's, you said legal and political, foundations to this, and so is that why even today we see such an entitlement to whiteness and such a privileged mindset when it comes to whiteness and their sense of entitlement throughout society in the world?
Yes, but it's more too, and I love that question and I want to expand upon it. It's more than a psychopolitical or psycho-legal, psychocultural function. It's also psychoeconomic because when you can establish within a culture and throughout all of your institutions that you deserve more based on this perception that you are superior, you get paid more.
Yes.
All levers of government are established to be able to support that perception and also make it a reality. And I think one of the things that Black people don't understand, and especially looking through the period of legalized enslavement in this country, is that those laws are not only criminalizing African people as slaves, but if you go back and you look at, for example, I'm going to point to a law here in just a moment. This all of the colonial level laws, they are targeting free Black people as well. And so within that context, the antebellum period, as well as what we see once Black people gain citizenship here in the United States, those laws are being set up to be anti-Black. It's not just about Black people in the condition of slavery, because free Blacks were targeted as well too. They were whipped. They could be subject to, there were no protections for free Black people as it pertained to being able to testify against whites. They could be sexually assaulted, particularly Black women at any time, just like enslaved women were. So we have to understand that the psychopolitical, psychocultural, psycholegal, and psychoeconomic context of this country is anti-Black. And that Dr. Bobby Wright says if you study the evolutionary history of white people's disposition and attitudes towards Black people, it reeks of psychopathy. He says in their relationship with the Black race, whites are psychopaths. And all you have to do is study the evolutionary history. And that is what I'm tracing in my work.
So when you go back to the colonialism, that foundation that was established there, how has that impacted the minds of white Americans today? That is still continuing to
That,
perpetuate throughout society.
absolutely. That is such a phenomenal question. And so pulling on the works of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in her work around the ISIS papers, particularly her color confrontation theory, Dr. Amos Wilson in his book, The Falsification of African Consciousness, and then Dr. Bobby Wright's work around the racial personality, the psychopathic racial personality and menticide. It's important to understand that this it has become what they espoused, and I agree with, as neurobiological, that it is epigenetic. It's programmed into their DNA. It is compulsive, that there is no inherent way for them to stop it. And again, when you see and you investigate, for example, the ways that they project who they are onto us, right? They project that we are a violent people, that we are rapists, that we are, criminal, etc. But if you trace their own legal history and you study the acts that they are committing, the offenses that they're committing against Black people, such as the Casual Killing Act of 1669, which everyone can Google. You can go to my book too,
Yes.
Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. But if you trace that, all of those psychological projections represent who they are, right? But because they are in control of not just the institutions, but also the narrative, they get to project who we are to the world. We're not even in control of that as Black people. What I'm also tracing in my book, though, are the ways in which we as Black people subscribe to and try to ascribe worth and value to ourselves through their measures of worth and value, be it whether it's education, whether it's economics, whether it is the way that we present culturally, et cetera. And so we are all subject to, though they have created the foundational cultural context, we are all subject to, and I believe suffering from, a collective psychosis. This whole entire country has been made up on a lie. And I think to understand that we exist within a delusion, within the delusion of white people, we need to start investigating this.
So, collective psychosis. We are not aware? Are we not aware that this has happened and is happening?
No, we're absolutely not aware. We're absolutely not aware. And if I may, in the reasons that we're not aware is because we don't know our history, right? And for example, when I hear conversations around reparations, my starting point for reparations, although it should include legalized enslavement of millions of African people, my starting point for reparations or that discussion begins shortly after Black people were given citizenship. Because now you have a cultural and legal context and political context where white people are rallying the courts and they begin to erode the citizenship of Black people, which some people refer to as Jim Crow. But when you study what's actually happening, for example, in 1870 and 1871, the United States Congress enacted laws that protected Black people from being targets of domestic terrorism. It was the first act of 1870 and then the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. By 1873, and particularly by 1880, by 1876, in the Cruikshank versus United States ruling, as well as the United States v. Harris ruling in 1883, those laws were overturned. And that ignited white people. The overturning of those laws basically authorized the white populace to be able to go out and lynch Black people in mass. And that is exactly what they did. The Slaughterhouse case of 1873 said, particularly, that the 14th Amendment did not guarantee Black people equal economic privilege. And so when we talk about reparations, we have to understand state by state, but also at the Supreme Court level, the federal level, that any and everything that we think Black people have gained or this narrative of Black progress that we tell ourselves is not true. It is delusional. And I always tell Black people, if you are comparing the conditions that Black people are in now to the fact that we were enslaved hundreds of years ago, that's your wrong reference point. That's the wrong reference point. Compare Black progress to white progress, and you will come out with a different answer to that equation.
I say. And so, what do you see happening now? We are broadcasting live right here on WAOK. And of course, we're also live on Facebook. We're talking with the author, Dante King, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti Blackness. On WAOK, we're going to go to break, but we're going to continue this conversation here on Facebook. When you talk about the history and you look at what's happening now, what do you see? Do you see history repeating itself?
Well, I don't think that history ever changed. I think this is the culture that we've existed in for so long. But we, based on what's projected to us through their educational narratives when we go to school, as well as in a larger media context, we believe that there has been progress. And so we're not contextualizing the current moment and what has been happening because many people have not been paying along to it or paying attention to it because we are intentionally kept busy and distracted so that we never are able to sit down and really study and read to uncover the truth.
So you're saying we're kept busy. Elaborate on that a little bit more.
Well, this country exists under the guise of or based on a cultural foundation of exploitation. And so we are required to work and exploit ourselves to be able to pay our way through lives. And this is a normalized context that we have adopted. And meanwhile, you have at the top people who are pulling the strings who are getting rich off of our productivity or production. Most people or many people within this country are not paid a livable wage. There's a classist structure to this, right? And so you have mostly, I would say 95 to 99% white men who are investing in the stock market based on gross domestic product, which is measuring the revenue generation that people are producing based on their productivity. People are getting rich, and so we still live within an indentured servitude type culture. We just call it employment, right? We still exist within an enslavement context when people are not making a livable wage. I mean, there are some people who existed during the period of legalized enslavement in this country whose living conditions were much better than many of the people now. There are people out here making $4, $5, $8 an hour, $9 an hour, people who are homeless and on the street. That's not a livable wage. One of the things that I point out too during the enslavement period is that masters, people who owned slaves, were required to take care of them by law. They were required to give them food, shelter. Now, the treatment was not great, right?
Hmm.
But these people had a place to live. They had, in many cases, food, drink, and please don't mishear me, anyone who's listening to this. I am not trying to justify, rationalize, or make better the conditions of slavery because they were absolutely abhorrent and horrible. But it also depended on the relationship because in some cases, there were people who were mixed race, biracial, mulatto, who had white fathers who were their masters, who made provisions for them and took care of them. So there are nuances in this story that I think we just have to begin to investigate.
I see. We are live here on WAOK and certainly live on Facebook on WAOK. We're sharing with the author Dante King, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. Was this a dangerous idea? This whole idea of whiteness, was this a dangerous idea that was not designed to support people at large, but it was this type of hierarchy of servitude and elite, and of course, servitude always working for those who are in an elite status.
For sure. And I would like to, if possible, share just a few examples of the colonial laws when we come back from break. But we have to understand that when whiteness was officially crafted into the legal context, particularly the first law that I referenced that I could find was in 1681, and it was a law in concerning marriage. And it was outlawing particularly white women or European women from marrying Black men. And the context of that law or the language of that law states English, freeborn, and other white women. That's the first time that language is used. But prior to that point, you've got colonial statutes in Virginia, Massachusetts, Maryland, that are specifically highlighting and taking actions against Negroes. And within the context of those laws, prior to the term whiteness being used, you see protections being made for people of English descent, other freeborn European people, and Christians. So we have to also understand the churches, the Church of England, and all of the other Protestant religions that came out of the Church of England, their role in conspiring with the English government to implement laws that were anti-Black, but also prioritize safety for them. And so, yes, whiteness in its creation is a political moniker. It is a political label that represents a group of people who chose to get together and form a conglomerate, right? People of English descent, people of Irish, Scots Irish descent, of Dutch descent, they were not white. They were of English descent, Scots Irish descent, Dutch descent. But this is a political conglomeration. And what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing is taking to task in her work is that they've attached themselves to this color concept as a juxtaposition to Blackness to ensure that they have political power, so to speak, cultural power, institutional power, economic power, all of it. And that is how it has functioned and operated from that period up until now. But we have to understand that this is a direct response. Whiteness is a direct response to the conglomerate of valuelessness that they labeled as Black, because we weren't Black. We were from Angola. We were
Yeah.
from Benin. We were from Mali. We were from Togo. We were from. So we just have to understand that these political functions have informed every aspect of our life. Race and racism is political. It's psychoeconomic. It's psychopolitical, psycholegal, psychocultural. All of it.
What would you say are some of, we're back from break. What are some of the other colonial laws that you want to highlight, Dante?
So, within the context of what I highlighted earlier about the 1680 Act preventing Negro insurrections, this law reads, I want you to pay attention to the language. It says, whereas the frequent meeting of considerable numbers of Negro slaves under pretense of feasts and burials is judged of dangerous consequence, for prevention whereof for the future, be it enacted by the King's most excellent majesty by and with the consent of the General Assembly, and it is hereby enacted by the authority aforesaid, that from and after the publication of this law, it shall not be lawful for any Negro or other slave to carry or arm himself with any club, staff, gun, sword, or any other weapon of defense or offense, nor to go or depart from his master or ground without a certificate from his master, mistress, or overseer, and such permission not to be granted but upon particular and necessary occasions. The next part of this law says, and every Negro or slave so offending, not having a certificate, shall be sent to the next constable, who is hereby enjoined and required to give the said Negro 20 lashes on his bare back.
Mm,
Every Negro or slave, that is
yeah,
every Black person. This law, in its form and in its function and in its intention, is established to target Black people in mass, free
yeah,
or enslaved. And what they start to add into these laws, if you go to my book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, are stipulations that actually state we are talking about people, Black people, whether bond or free. That language is written into the law, bond or free. The other piece that we have to also understand is as they are labeling or contextualizing Africans through this frame of Blackness, they are also pointing out, highlighting that only enslaved Black people can work for Black people based on complexion. So the
okay,
language of complexion is used in laws dating back to as early as 1705. In the South Carolina Negro Act of 1740, they particularly say that indigenous people are exempted from enslavement within that colony because if they mirror the color of a white person, the complexion or color of white people, but that Black people, mulatto people, mestizos, if they look Black, if they look like they are mixed with any
hmm,
color that is an extension of Blackness, that they are to be enslaved. And they said prima facie evidence, meaning that we're just using visual. We're just using our visual observations to determine the legal context, whether you should be enslaved or not. And so they name specifically color in that particular law.
I say. And how historically did this type of white supremacy handle rebellion to these politics, to these laws? Against how did they deal with rebellion? The fear of protests, the fear of insurrections, and speaking out and standing one's ground.
I will give you one example of how they dealt with it. Um, so I'll just say this: the Casual Killing Act of 1669,
Uh-huh.
and you can just Google this, basically said that if a white person happened to murder a Negro within the context of correction or chastisement, and that person, died, met their death, that they would be exempted. It would not be accounted a felony. So they absolved themselves legally of taking any responsibility. And there are subsequent laws, such as the law that I referred to or highlight in my book in 1672, which establishes that anyone that is employed to apprehend Negroes, it's similarly to the 1680 Negro Insurrection Act, that you can kill them, that you can murder them. And if I can go back to that
Yeah.
particular example and just finish reading it, because I think it's so important for people to understand that this did not end at all whatsoever. And so the things that we are experiencing today are an extension. The same types of anti-Blackness that we experience today dates back to the establishment of this culture all of these years ago. And so let me just go to it. My apologies. I've been.
No, no problem. You're listening to WAOK On Point with Juandolyn Stokes, the author of Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. Dante King is our very special guest today as we're exploring this conversation and really from a historical perspective in this new book, as well as his new podcast. He's talking about and sharing, giving you the historical reference. That's why it's very important that we know our history and understand our history so that we can understand who we are and who we should be in this present day. Dante?
That is right. And so this law says at the end of that Negro Insurrections Law of 1680, it says, and it is hereby further enacted by the authority aforesaid that if any Negro or other slave shall absent himself from his master's service and lie hid and lurking in obscure places, committing injuries to the inhabitants. And so let me just kind of translate this. So if Black people run away, if they rebel in terror because they are entirely terrorized and suffering from probably despondence, tremendous anxiety that rises to a level that we can't even potentially contextualize or relate to. If they are to absent themselves and by any means they're trying to defend themselves against people who are trying to recover them or remand them back into enslavement, and these people are extremely viciously violent with Black people during this period, if they resist, any person or persons that shall by any lawful authority be employed to apprehend and take the said Negro, that then in case of such resistance, it shall be lawful for such person or persons to kill the said Negro or slave. You can kill Black people so lying out by colonial law, European white colonial law, and so you can kill the person. You can kill the said Negro or slave so lying out and resisting, and that this law be once every 6 months published at the respective county courts and parish churches in this colony. So when you go to church, you're hearing a sermon that says, hey, the colonial legislature just created a law that's giving you the right to murder Black people. And so what I'm tracing in my book, how does this start to impact the psychology of this new group of people who are calling themselves white, who are new to these colonies, who have come from Europe? Right? They're coming and they are being socialized to be sociopaths, to be psychopaths, and
Mm-hmm.
predators and murderers. And so we still see it today, which is why when we look at, and I just created, because I'm putting out a new publication next year, but I just created a conceptual framework that talks about the 4Ds. Whenever you try to engage a white person in conversations about their history, because this is not Black history, this is white history, or an offense that they've committed that is a racist offense or racial bias, you get one of these 4 things. It's either defensiveness, deflection, denial, or dissociation. And I'm pulling from the works of some very brilliant and profound people, right? Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Bobby Wright, Dr. Alvin Poussaint, Dr. Jerome Fox. I mean, these very brilliant, high profile Black revolutionary clinicians back in the 1960s and 70s, they were talking about and discussing these matters within the same context or on the same levels that I'm discussing it. And I think my dissatisfaction around how these issues are discussed currently, you're not hearing this level of conversation. You're not hearing this level of nuance and or detail as it pertains to creating a factual historical context about why we are in the current moment we're in.
Right, right. I'm going to mention a few things to you, and I want to get your response on it. National Guard troops being released to certain cities throughout our country today. What's your response to that as you diagnose whiteness and anti-blackness?
That's right. These people have the ability and the power to do whatever it is they want. And so we've seen this before, even within the context of the legal example that I just shared with you and the
Yes.
guests who are tuning in. It is giving white people carte blanche to be able to go and apprehend, to recover, to jail potentially or criminalize Black life. That is what that law set up to do. But within the context of ICE being released into these cities, I go back to the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, which not only applied to potentially runaways who were Black, who were enslaved, but it also extended into free Black people because the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 gave every white citizen in the United States of America the legal right to stop a Black person on the street, to ask them for their papers to see whether or not they were a fugitive slave or not. And even if the Black person produced paperwork, such as we saw in the movie 12 Years a Slave with Solomon Northup, that's a real
Yeah.
story. Go back
Yeah.
and read that book. Even when the Black person produced papers, they were still remanded into slavery. And white people were paid bounties for turning Black people in and remanding them or having them go through the legal process through the courts to be remanded back into slavery. Judges were paid $10 if they remanded the Black person back into slavery based on that Fugitive Slave Act law, and $5 if they released them. If they said, oh, if you were able to prove that you are not an enslaved person. And so based on that proof, based on this legal proof that you're showing me, you
Yeah.
should be free. That is not what judges were incentivized to do. They were
Yeah.
incentivized to remand those people back into slavery. So this is not new. The National Guard or ICE being dispatched into these communities, it's just we have no context to understand it. And so people are saying, this is unprecedented. No, it is not. Go back and study the history of white people, and you will find that this is not unprecedented at all.
Yeah. What do you say about the this whole the Naturalization Act? I think it was in 1790 that regarding citizenship, that it was a prerequisite, right, for citizenship, whiteness.
To be white.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what are your thoughts on this whole idea of citizenship, even as we see different platforms coming out today that's questioning, are you a citizen of America or patriot of America?
Yeah, I think what is unfortunate is that that is again a concept or an idea
Mm-hmm.
based on a concept or a concept based on an idea that has been established by white people in this country. They have
Yeah.
the right to give citizenship and they have given it and defined it through their constitution that they created, and they can take it away at any time. And so when people put so much um, energy into this belief that their citizenship somehow protects them, it does not at all. And so all it is an idea. And Black people are not citizens of this country. We've never been citizens of this country. And so our attachment to that idea is rooted in psychological delusion, in psychosis. Because if you are a true citizenship of a place, you should not have to form protests. You should not have to form organizations or movements and organize to be able to fight to have your rights enforced. Black people are subjects of white people. We were brought here, and I'm just going to quote Dr. John Henry Clark. We were brought here as slaves for our labor and exploitation to work. And beyond that, we have not been needed in this country. And so you have seen through the late 19th and early 20th century, and I could come back on and give some more examples about this, but you've seen a perpetual targeting of Black people with white people using their institutions, taking away rights and privileges of Black people, having Black people have to file discriminatory and harassment suits based on racial discrimination. I mean, even the implements of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the 1968 still did not stop the legalized and ongoing cultural discrimination that Black people face. And then you have a series of Supreme Court rulings through the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and the 2000s that erode the rights of Black people, that erode the 1968 Fair Housing Law, the 1965 Civil Rights Law, which the Supreme Court is about to erode another aspect of the the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You have erosions of the title programs, of affirmative action policies of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But we are only taught the white narrative, so
Yeah.
we don't understand why we're not having as much success as we once were previously when we bring cases through the legal process. But we are not citizens of this country at all. And I
Yeah.
reject that idea wholeheartedly.
Yeah, Dante, right before you close, I wanted you to, when you talk about racial identity or Black identity, what are your thoughts around the use of African Americans, Black people of color? What based on history and your diagnosis of African Americans, what do you think is the proper or preference identity that people of color should use in today's context based on our history?
Well, I can only speak for myself. And for me, it's been a process of going back and
Okay,
investigating and locating my genealogy so I can understand the breakdown of my African heritage so that I can begin
that's
to
good.
uncover and study those aspects of my identity. Anything that we have established as a label in the English language, which is a language that has been forced upon us by people who have oppressed
Right.
us, is a
Yes.
form of whiteness. It is a form of their identity. So whether it's African American, whether it's Black, whether it's Negro, these are forms of Eurocentricity. And I think we just have to understand why they were put in place in the first place, which were to ascribe a level of valuelessness to us as a group. Because Black in European culture, particularly English culture, represented or were linked to things that were of no value, that were evil, such as the devil, baseness, where white, on the contrary, was linked to things like purity, God, angels. So that's what I'm more concerned with at this point.
That's good. That's very important. Dante, how can our audience follow you? You have a podcast, you have a book. Where can our audience go?
Yes, please go to DanteKing.com and subscribe to my website. You can also go to Dante D King Official on Instagram. Please follow me there. But subscribe to my website. There's also episodes of the Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness video series, where myself and a group of colleagues, but also former students and people that have participated in training workshops, discuss some of the contents of my book. And I think that is those episodes can be used to really engage in educational processes with your family. And I wanted to create a version because not everybody reads, so you
Yeah.
can access those episodes. They're not highly priced at all.
Awesome. Awesome. Make sure you follow and support the podcast. Where can the podcast be heard?
The podcast, you can go on my website and hear the first episode. The
Awesome.
second episode will be launching soon as well, and then I'm going to continue launching some additional episodes throughout November and December.
Listen, what you're doing is so needed, and we appreciate your sacrifice and your commitment. And pray God's continued blessings upon you as you continue to soar and educate us all. Thank
Thank,
you, Dante King. We appreciate you.
thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Juandolyn.
You're more than welcome. It's On Point with Juandolyn Stokes, News and Talk, WAOK. We'll be back with more. Thank you so much. This has been great. And anytime you want to come on and finish a discussion or different bits and pieces of it, just let us know.
Okay, I
Yeah.
absolutely will. Thank you.
And I see you've got the Reverend